From the halls of Montezuma, Kansas, that is, to wherever you may be, this is the Sure and Secure Podcast, a ministry of Morningside Community Church, helping you become sure that Christianity is true and that your salvation is secure through Jesus Christ. I'm Pastor Tim Erickson. Thanks for listening today. It's one of the best lines in movie history, and it's found at the end of the movie A Few Good Men. In that final climactic courtroom scene, the attorney, he's getting frustrated with the witness on the stand, the very man that he's trying to prove is the actual criminal in the case. And so he shouts at this man, "I want the truth." And the witness on the stand looks right back at him and shouts, "You can't handle the truth." Well, in our society today, there are a lot of people who can't handle the truth. They can't handle the truth that reality is one way and not another way. They can't handle the truth that reality is not whatever we make it, but that we have to live in the real world and not make it out to be something that it's not. Well, we'll talk about truth in a bit more depth on today's episode of the podcast as we continue our series through the book 12 Points That Show Christianity is True by Dr. Norman Geisler. Now, after the last episode introducing this series, I thought to myself, there's a point I should have made. So I want to make that point right now. It's just a point clarifying what this 12 steps paradigm is and what it is not. In particular, I wanted to clarify that this 12 steps paradigm is not a script for you to follow in conversations with other people. In other words, it's not telling you exactly what to say or exactly what you have to say to every person that you might discuss your faith with. In other words, think of it like this. The first step that we talked about in the last episode says truth about reality is knowable. Now, just because that's the first step in this paradigm doesn't mean that's the first thing that you have to talk about with someone anytime you're discussing your faith with them. Or if you share the gospel with them and perhaps they say, well, I'm just not really certain that Jesus rose from the grave. Okay, the point of this paradigm is not for you to then say, well, you know what? Truth about reality is knowable. No, it's not a script that you have to follow, okay? It's just a paradigm laying out an argument for the truth of Christianity. And it's a comprehensive case that Dr. Geisler is making here. And so since it's comprehensive, that means he's going to leave no stone unturned. But what that means for you is that this framework will talk about details that you may never need to discuss with anyone else. You may find that every person you share your faith with already agrees with you that truth about reality is knowable. So you may never have to discuss that with another person because, again, this isn't a script to follow. It's a case to be familiar with. And it can provide you with appropriate talking points for other people, depending on where they may agree and where they may disagree with you. But don't think that this is some kind of script that you're supposed to slavishly follow in every conversation that you have. Now, a lot of you are probably thinking, well, that's good to hear because I actually didn't understand point number 1 very well at all. Well, I know that point number 1, even point number 2 today, deals with some issues that are maybe a little unfamiliar to you, or at least they're described in terms that aren't entirely familiar. So go back, listen to these episodes at your leisure, and I trust that as you hear them, even maybe just one more time, that the things we are considering here in these episodes will make even more sense to you. Okay, so with that clarification in mind, let's get back to the 12 steps, or 12 points, I should say, as Dr. Geisler states it. So point number 1, truth about reality is knowable. Let me just go ahead and read for you the summary paragraph for that chapter, just by way of review here, or just in case you weren't able to catch the previous episode. So the summary says this: there is reality, and we can know it. I know that I exist. I know a world exists outside me. I know others exist. I also know that the laws of logic are true. I know the opposite of true is false. I know that total skeptics and agnostics are wrong. I know that we can know many things. And as Dr. Geisler showed in that chapter, that claim is simply undeniable. If someone says truth about reality is unknowable, what he's actually saying is, here's one truth I know about reality, namely, that truth about reality is unknowable. Well, that's a contradiction, so it cannot possibly be true. So it's undeniable that truth about reality is knowable. We know things, we know many things, and we know many things truly, and no one can truly deny that fact. Well, point number 2 that we're going to consider today is this: opposites cannot both be true. Another way to say that would be statements that contradict each other cannot both be true. Now, let's make sure we understand what a contradiction really is and how it's different from maybe just a mere disagreement. Okay, a disagreement would be something like if I was standing next to a friend and looking outside and I said, "It's raining." And then my friend said, "No, it's really just drizzling." Now, those two claims aren't contradictory because they're not saying exactly the opposite thing. Raining and drizzling are just two terms that describe different rates of precipitation. They both affirm that some kind of precipitation is falling at the moment. They just describe different rates of how quickly that precipitation is falling. And so that's not a contradiction, that's just a disagreement about how much rain is coming down at the moment. A contradiction would be something more like this. If me and my friend were standing side by side, we're both looking in exactly the same direction, the same patch of sky, the same patch of ground. And if I said, "It's raining," but my friend said, "No, it's not raining at all," well, those two claims would be contradictory because they're saying things that are exactly opposite from each other. So those two statements cannot both be true at the same time and in the same respect. Now, in the same respect, what does that mean? Well, that means if my friend and I are both intending to describe the way the weather actually is at that moment, then we are speaking in the same respect. So, if we are speaking in the same respect at the same point in time, then those statements would be contradictory, and they cannot both be true. The reason for that is because, as we learned in the last episode, truth simply means to tell it like it is. A true claim is a claim that accurately expresses what reality is like. And in reality, beings either exist or they don't exist. States of affairs either exist or they don't exist. So in reality, I either exist or I don't exist. And there's no middle ground between those two things. So it would be true for me to say I exist because that statement tells it like it is, right? And the opposite of that statement could not possibly be true at the same time because that's not what reality is like. Now, this is a tough pill to swallow for some people in our culture today because oftentimes people want to have the rhetorical trump card of being able to say, well, that's true for you, but it's not true for me. As people discuss important matters like religion or politics or things like that, they want to be able to escape the implications of a claim that someone else is making just by saying, well, that may be true for you, but it's not true for me. Now, when someone tries to use that statement, they're actually using a definition of truth that just doesn't hold up under scrutiny. What they're really trying to say is something like, well, that may be meaningful for you, but it's not meaningful for me. Or that might meet a need in your life, but it doesn't meet a need in my life. Or still yet, something like, that might make you feel good, but it doesn't make me feel good. Well, that's not the standard of truth. Truth is that which corresponds to reality. Truth is telling it like it is. Truth is making an accurate statement that expresses reality the way it really is. And since we all live in the same shared reality, then if a claim is true for me, then it has to be true for you as well. Because my claim has described our shared reality accurately. Now, this is a fairly short chapter in Dr. Geisler's book, so I'm not going to belabor this point much longer. Let me just read the chapter summary statement that he included here in the book. This will hopefully help crystallize all of this for you just a bit more. Here's what he wrote. Truth is what corresponds to reality. Even the denial of this claims to correspond to reality. Furthermore, we cannot deny that we know reality without knowing something about it. Likewise, the opposite of true is false. All views cannot be true. If one view is true, then its opposite is false. Neither can all views be false, for at least one view of two opposites must be true. For example, either God exists or else he does not. And if it is false that God does not exist, then it must be true that he does exist. Likewise, it is possible that one religion is true in all its essential claims. If so, then anything in any other religion that opposed these essential truths would be false. Now, at the end of that paragraph, you could begin to hear Dr. Geisler pointing out a very powerful implication for this observation that opposites cannot both be true. It has a powerful implication for religion, for the study of religion, and for the practice of religion. And the implication is this: when you discover that a religious claim is true, you can commit to it without feeling like you should remain uncommitted until you've checked out every other religion that's out there. Just imagine if you had to remain uncommitted to any religion until you had checked out all religions. Just think about how long that process would take, and thus how long you would have to live being uncommitted to any religion at all. If you have ever tried to study other religions, you know that it takes time. And if you think of how many religions are out there in the world, there are a number of noteworthy religions. And, by that I mean religions that have, maybe a few million followers. There are quite a few religions in that category. And then even in those religions, there are branches and offshoots and things like that. So there are a bewildering number of religions in the world. And if you had to study all of them before you could commit to just one of them, well, you would never, ever get to the end of that process, because by the time you'd gotten close, you'd probably discover that some new religion had started as an offshoot of another religion. But here's what today's observation allows us to do. It allows us to commit ourselves to a truth, knowing that anything that contradicts that truth must be false. So, in other words, if I discover that it is true that Jesus is the Son of God, then I can commit myself to that truth without having to feel like I need to remain agnostic about it or uncommitted to it until I've checked out what every other religion might have to say about Jesus. Because if it's true that Jesus is the Son of God, then I can also know that any claim that contradicts that is false. So again, if I know it is true that Jesus is the Son of God, then I know I have discovered the way things really are, the way reality actually is. And I can rest assured that it cannot possibly be the case that Jesus is not the Son of God, because opposites cannot both be true. Now, of course, it can be important and helpful at some point for you to ask yourself, well, why do I believe it's true that Jesus is the Son of God? How did I start believing that? And did I start believing it for a good reason? Do I have good reason to continue believing that? Does the evidence actually support that? Now, those are helpful and beneficial questions to work through, especially because, as we'll see in the rest of this series, we have every reason to believe that Jesus is the Son of God. We have every reason to believe that the essential claims of Christianity are all true. And if they are true, then we can be fully committed to them, even if we have never had the time or opportunity to study what other religions believe. Well, that's going to be all for this episode today, in part because I hope that if the content of this episode was less than entirely clear to you, perhaps you'll want to go back and listen to the whole thing again. And maybe with a little review, some of these concepts and claims will become a little more clear to you. Let me remind you again that in this series, we're going through a book, 12 Points That Show Christianity is True, from Dr. Norman Geisler. And so if these episodes are just whetting your appetite for the whole thing, you might want to go ahead and buy that book and just start reading through it for yourself. Well, as always, let me say thank you so much for listening to this episode and for giving me the opportunity to teach you something to the glory of God.